I was mending an old curtain that morning, sunlight spilling softly across my kitchen floor when the needle jammed. My sewing machine, a creaky relic from my younger years, hadn't been used much lately. My hands trembled as I reached into the narrow drawer beneath it, searching for a spare needle. That's when I felt something cold, smooth, and unexpectedly round. At first, I thought it was just a button, but when I pulled it out and wiped away the thin layer of dust, my breath caught in my throat. It was a tiny bracelet, delicate, golden, with little charms shaped like hearts and stars. The name engraved on it sent a chill down my spine. Lucy. The world seemed to stop. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant barking of a dog, all of it faded into a ringing silence. I hadn't heard that name spoken in 50 years, not since that night. My knees almost gave out, and I clutched the edge of the table to steady myself. The bracelet gleamed faintly in the morning light, as if mocking me, whispering all the things I had tried so hard to forget. I sank into the wooden chair beside me, my mind spinning back to a different time, a time when laughter still filled these walls, when my hair was the color of autumn leaves, and my hands didn't shake. I remembered Lucy's tiny fingers wrapped around mine, the way her eyes used to follow me everywhere. She was so small, so fragile, and then one day she was gone. Everyone told me to move on. It wasn't your fault, they said, but those words meant nothing. Not when you've buried a secret deep enough to choke your soul. I turned the bracelet over in my hand, tracing the engraving with my thumb. How did it end up here in the drawer of the sewing machine I'd used every week for decades? I had cleaned that drawer countless times, replaced threads, pins, buttons, but never, not once, had I seen this. The air grew heavier. I stood, staring at the machine, as if it could explain itself. I could almost hear my husband's voice, gruff and impatient. "You always keep too many things, Eleanor. Someday you'll drown in your own clutter." Arthur had been gone for 10 years now. A kind man to most, but there were parts of him I never understood. Shadows in his eyes when certain topics came up. Secrets he carried, locked tight behind a calm smile. Could it be that he put the bracelet there? My heart began to race, a sickening rhythm echoing through my ribs. I walked over to the cabinet where I kept my old photo albums. My fingers trembled as I pulled one from the shelf, its edges frayed, the cover cracked. Inside were fading snapshots, birthdays, holidays, picnics by the river. And there, near the back, a photograph I hadn't dared to look at in years, Arthur, holding a baby wrapped in a white blanket. Lucy. But something about the picture felt wrong this time. I'd always remembered Arthur smiling in it, but when I looked closely now, I saw how tense his jaw was, how his hand gripped the baby's blanket too tightly. My stomach twisted. I closed the album and looked again at the bracelet. "Lucy," I whispered aloud, my voice breaking. "What happened to you?" I had always believed the official story. That night stormy, relentless, the nurse had fallen asleep. Lucy had been in her crib, and when morning came, the hospital said she was gone. Just gone. Stolen, they said. A kidnapping. We'd searched for months. Years. The police, the flyers, the late-night calls that went nowhere, but no one was ever caught. Arthur had insisted we stop after a while. "You'll destroy yourself," he'd said, taking my hands. "We have to let her go." And I had tried, God knows, I had tried, but a mother never stops looking. Even in crowds, I'd catch glimpses of little girls with brown curls and think, what if? Now, 50 years later, her bracelet had found its way back to me, hidden in a place only someone close could reach. The thought made me sick. I forced myself to stand and looked around the house, as if expecting to see Arthur's ghost smirking in the corner. The wind brushed against the window pane, and I felt a cold draft pass through the room. My fingers tightened around the bracelet. What if this wasn't an accident? What if someone wanted me to find it now? After all this time, I couldn't shake the feeling that the bracelet wasn't just lost. It was placed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, the bracelet lying on the table beside a dim lamp, its surface catching bits of yellow light. Every tick of the clock pulled me deeper into memories I had buried for half a century. The nursery wallpaper with tiny ducks, the smell of baby powder, the way Arthur used to linger outside the door before stepping in. He had changed after Lucy disappeared, became distant, irritable. He started locking his study at night, muttering about work, avoiding my questions. I told myself it was grief, that he, too, was just broken in his own way. But now, I wasn't sure anymore. If he had hidden this bracelet, what was he hiding it from? I went to his old study, a room I hadn't entered in years. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Dust coated the shelves, and the air smelled of old paper and something faintly metallic. I switched on the light. His desk stood just as he'd left it, an ancient oak slab filled with drawers and compartments. My hands shook as I pulled the first drawer open. Pens, envelopes, brittle photographs. The second, more papers, mostly bills and letters. Then, in the third drawer, beneath a stack of yellowing newspaper clippings, I found an old key. It was small and bronze, with a faded ribbon tied to it. My breath hitched. The ribbon was the same pink color as Lucy's baby blanket. My heart thudded painfully. I remembered Arthur once telling me, "Some things are better left alone, Ellie." His tone that day had been cold, final. I hadn't questioned it then. But now, that sentence echoed through me like a warning. I looked again at the key. My hands trembled as I took it, feeling its weight. There was only one thing left in this house that still locked the cellar door. I hadn't stepped down there in years. I stood at the cellar door with the small bronze key warming my palm, the house holding its breath around me. The knob resisted, then gave with a sticky sigh, and a cool draft rose that smelled of stone, metal, and rain long gone. The light switch clicked uselessly. I took a lamp from the hall table and went down, one careful step at a time, every tread groaning under my weight like it disapproved of what I was about to do. Cobwebs brushed against my forehead. The circle of light wobbled over Arthur's old workbench, over crates of paint he never opened, and a half-finished shelf that still bore his pencil marks. He built it the summer after we lost Lucy. He said keeping busy helped. I'd believed him then. Now I wasn't so sure. The air down there was heavy, like a room that had kept secrets too long. I traced the edge of the shelf, my fingers finding a small hollow that felt out of place. The wood there was smoother, worn down by repeated touch. I pressed it without thinking, and the panel shifted, just slightly. A soft click echoed in the dark. My stomach turned cold. Inside was a small, brown paper parcel, tied with frayed twine. My name wasn't written on it, but something inside me already knew it was mine. The paper crumbled at the corners when I lifted it out. The twine snapped easily. The lamplight trembled across the bundle as I peeled the paper back. Inside was a small tin box, painted pale blue but worn to metal along the edges. It was embossed with lilies faded, graceful, the kind that used to decorate sympathy cards. I touched the center. It was dented, as if someone had pressed it too hard in anger or grief. The key fit perfectly. The lock clicked open like it had been waiting all these years just for this sound. Inside, the first thing I saw was a baby's cardigan, tiny, white, hand-knit. I pressed it to my chest, and for a moment the world vanished. I remembered knitting it during those last quiet evenings before Lucy came. I could still see the uneven stitches where I'd dropped a loop and refused to undo the row. Arthur had teased me for it, saying our baby would be fashionable before she was born. Beneath the cardigan was a hospital bracelet. The elastic had snapped long ago, replaced with thread. My hands shook as I brought it closer to the light. The ink was faint, but the number 317B was clear. And the name? It had been scratched out. Someone had written over it in pencil. The first letter that peeked through the scratching looked like an L, but the penciled name was different. Infant Pending. My blood turned cold. I set it down and found a photograph beneath it. It was black and white, slightly blurred at the edges. A nurse stood in a hallway under a clock showing 2:10. She held a swaddled bundle in her arms. Next to her stood a man, his face turned just enough for me to see the shape of his jaw, and on his wrist a cracked leather watchband. My heart dropped. That watch, Arthur's watch, the same one he had scratched on the shed door. I couldn't breathe. My hands clutched the photo until my fingers hurt. The air seemed to hum around me, the cellar pressing closer. At the bottom of the tin were papers thin, yellowed, typed on old carbon paper. I squinted under the lamp's glow. The words blurred together. Temporary placement pending maternal consent. Transfer through informal channels. Arrangement acknowledged. No hospital letterhead. No official stamps. Just initials at the bottom. P, M, and A, K, Arthur Kent. I sat down on the cold stool beside the workbench. My body felt too heavy, my heart too loud. The man I had spent my life defending, the one I'd loved through grief and silence, what had he done? Tears came, quietly at first, then in shaking sobs that echoed through the room. I wept for Lucy. I wept for myself. And I wept for a man I realized I never truly knew. When the tears finally stopped, I kept searching the tin. Beneath the papers was a small, rusted music box. When I wound it, It played just 3 notes before freezing a lullaby cut short. There was also a diner receipt, dated 2 days after Lucy's birth. My husband's signature scrawled faintly at the bottom, but the last thing inside made my breath stop. A photograph of a young woman sitting on a park bench, feeding pigeons. She wore a wool coat several sizes too big, her hair pinned loosely, her expression lost somewhere between sadness and fury. On the back, in Arthur's neat handwriting, were the words, "Sunday, she'll manage." No name, no explanation. I turned the photograph over again. The pigeons blurred like white ghosts. The woman's hands small, pale, trembling, looked almost familiar. Was she a nurse? The real mother? My mind refused to settle on one answer. I looked again at the initials P. M. I whispered the name slowly. Pauline Mercer, the nurse from Street. Agnes, the one who told me not to cry because babies can sense fear. She used to hum when she worked, a tune that never seemed to end. I remembered her rough fingers tucking my hair behind my ear the night before Lucy disappeared. Could it be her? I climbed back upstairs, the tin and its ghosts pressed tight to my chest. The kitchen light felt too bright after the cellar's darkness. I set everything on the table, the bracelet, the tin, the photograph, and pulled open the drawer where I kept the old phone book. There were 3 listings for Pauline Mercer. The first number rang endlessly. The second was disconnected. The third finally answered, a soft, cautious voice on the other end. "Hello. May I speak with Pauline Mercer, please?" I asked, my voice shaking. A pause. Then, "I'm sorry. My mother passed away last winter. Who's calling?" "This is Eleanor Kent." I swallowed hard. I was a patient at Street Agnes Hospital 50 years ago. Silence. Then the faint sound of a breath catching. "She told me you might call," the voice said quietly. "She left something for you. An envelope with your name. She said if you ever called or ever came, I should give it to you. She said she was sorry." I felt my knees weaken. My hand tightened around the receiver. "Where are you?" She told me a town named 2 hours north. I scribbled it down with a shaking pen. "May I come tomorrow?" "You should," she said softly. "There are things you need to know." When the call ended, the quiet around me felt strange, expectant. I looked at the tin on the table. Its lilies caught the light, dull but steady. Arthur had been gone for 10 years, but I could feel him in every corner of this house now, every floorboard, every shadow. The truth he left behind was heavier than his absence ever was. I made tea I couldn't drink. I sat in silence until dusk, the light crawling across the walls like fading memories. Then I went to the bedroom and set the tin on his old nightstand, beside the mark his wedding ring had carved into the wood over the years. "I found it," I whispered into the air, "and I'm going to find the rest." When morning came, I dressed in my old church coat, tucked the bracelet into my pocket, and picked up the tin. As I opened the front door, something white caught my eye, an envelope on the step. It wasn't sealed. My name was written in a neat, old-fashioned hand. I looked up and down the street. No one was there. I opened it. Inside was a single line, written in shaky letters. "I'm sorry I waited," and beneath it, a photograph of a young girl with brown curls and a smile that looked exactly like mine. The bracelet in my pocket felt suddenly warm, almost alive. I locked the door behind me. The morning air bit through my coat as I drove north, the sky a dull stretch of gray that seemed to hang lower with every mile. The road wound through quiet villages, fields half buried in frost, and rows of trees that looked like old men bent from too many winters. I barely noticed the scenery. My thoughts clung to the bracelet in my pocket, the tin on the seat beside me, and that photograph the young girl whose smile mirrored mine. At one point, I almost turned back. 50 years had already taken enough from me. What difference could a few more answers make now? But then I thought of the note. "I'm sorry I waited." Someone had written that recently. Someone alive. When I reached the small town Pauline's daughter had mentioned, I found the house easily a faded yellow cottage tucked behind a line of pines. The curtains were drawn, and the porch creaked as I climbed the steps. I knocked once, twice. The door opened to a woman in her 50s, her hair streaked with silver and tied back loosely. Her eyes were kind but wary. "Mrs. Kent?" I nodded. "I'm Anne," she said quietly. "Come in. I've been expecting you." Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and dust. There were framed photographs on every wall, birthdays, weddings, babies in bonnets. Life, continuing, unbroken. My heart ached at the sight. Anne led me to the kitchen, where an old envelope waited on the table. My name was written across it in careful cursive, faded but unmistakable. The handwriting was the same as the one on the note I'd found that morning. "She made me promise," Anne said softly. "She said you deserved the truth before she went." I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside was a letter, yellowed and trembling in my hands. "Eleanor, I have carried this burden for 50 years. I don't know if forgiveness exists for something like this, but I hope at least understanding might. The night your daughter disappeared, she was not taken by a stranger. There was no kidnapping. She was switched at birth." My vision blurred. I blinked hard and read on. "Arthur came to the hospital the night before the delivery. He brought money. He said you couldn't have children, that the baby you carried wouldn't survive. He begged me to help him spare you that pain. I don't know what he told you, but he said it would destroy you if you found out. There were 2 births that night, yours, and a young girl's, unwed, alone. Her baby was healthy, yours wasn't." The words seemed to bleed together. I could barely breathe. "He made me give you the other baby. The mother, poor thing, was told her child hadn't made it." She screamed until her voice gave out. "Arthur paid for her to leave town. I told myself I was helping both women, that it was mercy. But I was wrong. So wrong. I felt my body go cold. The chair beneath me seemed to disappear. My hands trembled violently as I read the last lines. I left clues, in case I found the courage to tell you one day. The bracelet was hers, the real mother's gift. I hid it where he wouldn't think to look. I hoped someday you'd find it. Her name was Lucy, too. Not the child's hers, the mother's." The letter slipped from my fingers, landing softly on the table. My head spun. The world felt upside down. For 50 years I had grieved for a daughter that had never been mine, and yet I had loved her with every piece of my soul. I looked up at Anne, who watched me with silent compassion. "Did she tell you what happened to the other baby?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Anne nodded slowly. "Yes. She found her years later. She grew up just a few towns away, adopted by a kind family. Pauline wanted to tell you, but your husband forbade her. He said you'd never recover." My heart ached at the thought. She knew where my real daughter was. All this time? "She did," Anne whispered. "But by the time she found the courage to write, your husband was gone. She was dying, and she wanted to make it right." The words felt heavy, unreal. I thought of all the birthdays, all the nights I had prayed over a nursery that no longer mattered, the years I'd cursed God for taking Lucy from me when all along he had given me someone else's. I asked quietly, "Where is she? The girl, my daughter?" Anne hesitated, then reached into a drawer and pulled out another small envelope. Inside was a recent photograph of a woman standing in front of a bookstore. Her hair was brown, streaked with gray, her eyes warm but tired. She looked familiar. Something in her smile, in the tilt of her head. "She owns a shop by the river," Anne said. "Her name is Claire." I traced the photo with my thumb. "And the baby I raised? She grew up with the name Mary. She married young. She lives 2 towns over. Mary, my world tilted again. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Anne reached across the table and took my hand. "You loved her, didn't you? More than life itself." My throat burned as I spoke. So what was I then? A thief? A mother to someone else's child? Anne shook her head gently. "You were a mother, and you still are." We sat in silence for a long time. Outside, wind brushed the trees, scattering dry leaves across the yard. I thought of Arthur, of his quiet smiles, the secrets behind his eyes. He had built his entire life on a lie. But he had also given me the one thing I had ever truly loved. I folded Pauline's letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. My hands no longer shook. "Can you give me Claire's address?" I asked. Anne hesitated. "Are you sure you're ready?" "No," I admitted, "but if I don't go now, I never will." She wrote the address on a small notepad and handed it to me. I thanked her, though the words felt small compared to the storm inside me. As I stood to leave, Anne said softly, "My mother never forgave herself, but she said one thing over and over near the end: tell her the truth sets the soul free." I nodded, clutching the paper tightly. The drive to the river felt endless. Every mile peeled back another layer of memory, Arthur's lies, my blind devotion, the night the world fell apart. When I finally saw the bookstore sign Riverside Reads, my hands went cold on the steering wheel. I parked and sat for a long while, watching through the windshield as the woman from the photograph arranged books in the window. She moved slowly, with grace, unaware that her real mother sat just beyond the glass, heart pounding like it was still 20 years old. The bracelet in my pocket felt heavier than gold. I took a breath, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the door. When I opened it, a bell chimed softly overhead. She turned, and for a moment we both froze. Her eyes met mine, and something deep and wordless passed between us. "Can I help you?" she asked, smiling politely. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Yes," I whispered. "I think you can." Her voice was gentle, the kind that could calm a storm. "What are you looking for?" she asked again, tilting her head slightly, unaware of the weight that question carried. I wanted to speak, but words tangled in my throat. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echo in my ears. Up close, I could see the faint lines around her mouth, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. There was something heartbreakingly familiar about it, like looking at a reflection in rippling water, something known yet unreachable. I'm looking for a book," I managed, my voice trembling. "Something about beginnings." Her smile deepened. "That's a beautiful theme," she said, moving toward a nearby shelf. "We actually have a section for that, stories of rediscovery, second chances, my favorite kind." I followed her slowly, every step heavy. She reached for a book and handed it to me. "The Memory Keeper's Daughter." I stared at the title, unable to hide the irony twisting inside me. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, noticing my shaking hands. I nodded quickly. "Yes, it's been a long journey." She smiled, her eyes full of quiet empathy. "Aren't they all?" The way she said it pierced through me. That same softness, I'd seen it in the mirror when I used to soothe Mary after nightmares, when I'd whisper that everything would be all right even though I wasn't sure it ever would. I clutched the book to my chest, feeling my composure crumble. "Do you believe," I asked carefully, "that we ever truly forget where we come from?" She paused, thinking. "No," she said finally. "I think something always stays like a scent, or a song you can't name. It follows you, waiting for you to listen." Her words made my throat tighten. "And if what we remember isn't the truth, then," she said softly, "we start over with what is." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I wanted to tell her everything, to say I am your mother, your real mother, to pull her into my arms and feel her heartbeat against mine. But I couldn't, not yet. The truth was still raw, bleeding between the pages of that letter I'd carried like a wound. Instead, I asked, "Did you grow up around here?" She nodded. "A few towns away. My parents owned a bakery. They were good people, simple, kind. My father used to say I was the best mistake that ever happened to them." She laughed softly. "They told me I was adopted when I was 18. It never bothered me, really. I always felt loved." Her laughter was warm, but each word was a knife twisting in my chest. I smiled faintly to hide the ache. "You were lucky," I said. She shrugged, glancing toward the window. "Maybe, though sometimes I wonder who she was, the woman who had me." My breath hitched. "She must have had her reasons," she continued quietly. "For giving me up, I mean. I used to think about her on my birthdays, whether she thought of me too." I looked away quickly, afraid my face would give me away. "I'm sure she did," I whispered. "Every single year." She smiled. a small, wistful thing. You sound like you know her. I think, I said carefully, that mothers never stop loving, no matter what happens, even when they're forced to hide it. Something flickered in her eyes, then curiosity, confusion, maybe recognition. She studied me for a moment, like she was trying to place a face from a half-remembered dream. You remind me of someone, she said finally. I can't think who. I forced a trembling smile. Maybe we met before. Maybe. She looked down at the bracelet I'd unconsciously taken from my coat pocket and was turning over in my hands. Her expression softened. That's beautiful, she said. Is it antique? I hesitated, then held it out to her. It belonged to someone very dear to me. Would you try it on? She frowned slightly but took it, curious. As she slipped it over her wrist, the golden hearts and stars glimmered in the afternoon light, and I swear, for a heartbeat, time folded in on itself. The bracelet fit perfectly. She smiled faintly, admiring it. It's lovely. It feels, I don't know, familiar. Tears stung my eyes. It suits you, I whispered. It always has. Before she could ask what I meant, the shop door opened. A bell jingled, and a young woman entered, late 20s, with kind eyes and hair like honey. Mom, Mrs. Lawson wants her book order ready by Thursday. Oh, sorry, am I interrupting? I froze. Mom. Claire turned to her daughter. It's all right, sweetheart. This is Mrs. She paused, realizing I hadn't given a name. Eleanor, I said quietly. Just Eleanor. The girl smiled. Nice to meet you. I'm Anna. Anna, my granddaughter. She gave me the same polite smile Claire had, the same crinkle at the corner of her mouth that I used to have before time turned me into stone. My vision blurred again. I wanted to reach out, to touch her hand, to memorize her face, but I stood still, afraid the truth might spill out like a flood. I was just helping Eleanor find a book, Claire said gently, turning back to me. Will you be all right getting home? It's starting to rain. I nodded slowly. Yes, but before I go, could I ask you one last thing? Of course. If you ever found your birth mother, I said softly, what would you say to her? She looked surprised, then thoughtful. I suppose I'd tell her I turned out all right, she said with a small smile, and that I forgive her for everything she couldn't control. Something broke inside me then. My vision shimmered as I swallowed the words, clawing to escape. That's very kind of you. She tilted her head. Are you sure you're all right? I nodded, tears threatening to spill. More than I've been in years. I left the bookstore before my heart gave me away. The rain had begun, soft and cold, washing the dust from the street. I stood under the awning, gripping the bracelet in my palm. I'd seen her eyes. I'd heard her voice. She was alive, safe, loved. Everything I'd ever begged the universe for, just not in my arms. When I finally got back to the car, I sat there in silence, rain pattering against the windshield. My reflection in the glass looked older than ever, worn but strangely lighter. I whispered, "Thank you, Pauline," and closed my eyes. But just as I was about to start the car, I saw movement through the rain. Claire was standing in the doorway looking out at me. She hesitated, then stepped forward, raising a hand half wave, half question. Something deep inside me stirred. Maybe she didn't know who I was, but maybe, just maybe, she felt it. I waved back, a trembling smile on my lips. Then I drove away, tears and rain blurring the world into silver streaks. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain kept tapping against my window, like soft fingers reminding me of all I'd left unsaid. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the bracelet on my nightstand catching the faint glow of the streetlight. My chest felt heavy, torn between relief and unbearable ache. I had seen her my daughter, and though she hadn't known me, something inside her must have recognized the truth our hearts had never forgotten. At dawn, I got up and made tea I couldn't taste. I kept replaying every moment from the bookstore, the way her eyes lingered, the tone of her voice when she spoke of forgiveness. It was as if she had already been waiting for me, without even knowing why. When the post arrived, a small envelope slid through the slot. No return address, just my name scrawled in shaky handwriting. My pulse quickened. I tore it open. Inside was a single page, written in blue ink. Mrs. Kent. You don't know me, but I think we might be connected. I believe you came to my mother's shop yesterday. I found something last night, an old photograph tucked between the pages of a book she keeps on her bedside table. It's of a woman holding a baby, and on the back is written, Eleanor and Lucy, 1974. I don't know how this is possible, but I need to understand. Please meet me at the bookstore after closing 8 p.m. Claire. My heart stopped for a moment. She knew. Somehow, she knew. All day, I moved through my house like a ghost, my thoughts echoing off the walls. The photographs, the empty crib still stored in the attic, the quiet hum of the sewing machine, they all seemed to whisper the same thing. It's time. When the clock neared 7, I put on my coat and tucked the bracelet into my pocket again. The drive to the river felt shorter this time, as if the car itself understood the urgency of what waited at the end. The sky was bruised purple when I arrived. The shop lights were still on, though the closed sign hung in the window. Through the glass, I could see her standing behind the counter, clutching the same photograph she had mentioned in her letter. She looked up as I entered. Her eyes were wide, uncertain, but there was no fear in them, only longing. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said quietly. I wasn't sure I should, I replied. We stood there, the air thick between us. She held out the photograph with trembling hands. This is you, isn't it? I took the picture, my fingers brushing hers. The image blurred through my tears me, 50 years younger, holding a baby wrapped in a white blanket, smiling through exhaustion and joy. Yes, I whispered, that's me, and that's you. She stared at me, her lips parting slightly as her breath caught. So it's true, I said softly. I didn't know, not until a few days ago. Your father, my husband, he lied to me. He took you from another woman to spare me heartbreak, and he let me believe you'd been stolen. I spent half my life grieving a child who wasn't mine, and the other half never knowing the one who was. She covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Oh, my God. I reached out, gently taking her hand. You were never lost to me. Somehow, I think I was always meant to find you again. She shook her head, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. I had parents, good ones. They loved me more than anything. I don't want to dishonor them, but you're not, I interrupted softly. Love doesn't replace love. It only adds to it. Her tears fell freely now. She stepped closer, searching my face. I thought about her for so many years, the woman who gave me life. I used to imagine her hair, her voice, her hands. I never thought I'd actually see her. You've seen me your whole life, I said through my tears. Every time you looked in the mirror. A quiet sob broke from her lips. Then she moved toward me, hesitating for a breath before falling into my arms. I held her as tightly as I could, as if 50 years of distance might collapse in that single embrace. She was shaking, whispering against my shoulder, "You're real. You're really real." I closed my eyes and breathed her in the scent of old books, rain, and something achingly familiar. My body remembered before my mind could catch up. "You're my miracle," I whispered. I thought God had forgotten me, but he was just waiting for the right time. When we finally pulled apart, her face was wet but radiant, her eyes brighter than I'd ever seen. She reached into her pocket and took out the bracelet. "This was yours, wasn't it?" I nodded. "Your birth mother gave it to you when you were born. Her name was Lucy, too. Pauline told me she wanted you to have it, even if she couldn't keep you." Claire looked down at it, tears slipping silently onto the gold surface. "I'll keep it safe," she said, "for both of them. And for you." I smiled through my tears. That's all I ever wanted. We sat together for hours after that, talking quietly in the dim shop light. I told her about Arthur, about his guilt, his lies, and the man he had been before all of it consumed him. She told me about her childhood, her children, the bakery her adoptive parents once ran. Every word stitched us together, like two torn pieces of fabric finally finding their seam. At one point, she looked at me with a shy smile. "You know, when you came into the shop yesterday, I felt something. I couldn't explain it. It was like déjà vu." "I felt it too," I admitted. "The kind of feeling that doesn't ask questions, it just knows." She laughed softly. "Maybe love remembers, even when we forget." When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. The rain had stopped, leaving the street glistening under the lamplight. She took my hands, squeezing them gently. "Don't disappear again," she said. I smiled through a fresh wave of tears. "Not this time." As I turned to go, she called after me. "Mom?" The words struck me like sunlight breaking through clouds. I turned, my throat tightening. "Would you come for dinner tomorrow?" she asked, hesitant but hopeful. "Anna's been asking about you. I told her you were an old family friend, but maybe it's time to tell her the truth too." I nodded slowly, unable to speak. My lips trembled into a smile. I'd love that. When I stepped outside, the night air was cool and sweet. I looked up at the sky at the faint scatter of stars and whispered, "Thank you." Somewhere, I hoped, Pauline was listening. And maybe Lucy too. The one who had loved me enough to let me go, and the one who had loved her enough to hide the truth. As I walked to my car, I realized something I hadn't in years. For the first time since that night 50 years ago, I didn't feel alone. The next evening, I stood outside Claire's house with a bouquet of white lilies in my hands, the same kind that decorated the old tin box Arthur had hidden. My heart pounded like it hadn't in years. Through the window, I could see the soft glow of lamps, the shadows of people moving inside. Laughter drifted faintly through the curtains, warm and alive. I hesitated at the door, breathing in the scent of rain-washed earth. For so long, I had dreamed of finding my daughter. I never imagined the moment would come, wrapped in such ordinary tenderness, a front porch, the smell of cooking, a heartbeat of hesitation before knocking. Finally, I raised my hand and knocked. Claire opened the door, her smile gentle, her eyes bright. "You came," she said softly. "I promised I would," I whispered. She stepped aside, motioning me in. The house smelled like cinnamon and old wood, the kind of home where stories linger in the walls. A table was set in the dining room, simple but thoughtful. There were 3 plates. Anna appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Hello, Eleanor," she said with a shy smile. "Mom said you'd be joining us." "Thank you for having me," I replied, though my voice wavered. Dinner was quiet at first, gentle conversation about books, the weather, the small-town fair coming up next week. I watched them both, mother and daughter, the way they moved, the way they shared glances and finished each other's sentences. They had a rhythm I recognized deep in my bones. It was the rhythm of belonging. After dessert, Claire poured us tea and looked at me across the table. Her expression was calm, but her eyes glimmered with unspoken emotion. "Anna," she said softly, "there's something I want to tell you." The girl frowned, curious. "What is it?" Claire took my hand across the table. "Yesterday, I found out that the woman sitting here isn't just a family friend. She's my mother." The room fell into stillness. The clock ticked somewhere in the corner. Anna blinked, confused at first. Then her eyes widened. "Wait, what?" Claire squeezed my hand tighter, her voice trembling. "I was adopted. Mom, Eleanor, she's my birth mother. We found each other by accident, or maybe fate." Anna's mouth opened slightly as she looked between us. "You mean she's my grandmother?" The word hit me like sunlight, soft, warm, unbelievable. I smiled, my throat tight. "Yes," I whispered, "if you'll have me." For a moment, Anna said nothing. Then she stood, walked around the table, and threw her arms around me. "Of course I will," she said, voice breaking. I held her close, my tears finally spilling free. I'd missed 50 years, but in that moment, time folded. Everything I'd lost, everything I'd mourned, it all found its way back through that single word. Grandmother. When we pulled apart, Claire was crying too, though she smiled through it. "See?" she said softly. "Love doesn't disappear. It just waits for the right moment to return." Later that night, when Anna went to bed, Claire and I sat in the living room together. The fire crackled softly, casting golden light across her face. She held the bracelet in her hand, turning it slowly. "I used to think I was born from nothing," she said, "that I was just a mistake that someone didn't want. But now I know there was love, so much love all along, even if it was hidden. There was never a day I didn't love you, I said quietly. Even when I didn't know you existed, something in me still searched for you. Every lullaby I hummed, every prayer I whispered, it was always for you. She looked at me, eyes shining. I believe that. For a long while we said nothing. The firelight danced on the walls, and I thought about Arthur. I wondered if, in his own broken way, he had believed he was protecting me, if he'd ever looked at the little girl I'd raised, Mary, and felt the same guilt that had haunted him all those years. I would never know. But somehow, I found it in me to forgive him, because sitting there beside Claire, I finally understood something I hadn't for half a century. Love isn't about possession or perfection. It's about endurance. It survives lies, distance, even time. Before I left, Claire walked me to the door. The night was still, the air cool and fragrant with pine. She hugged me tightly. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "Anna's already planning breakfast." I laughed through my tears. "I will. You won't get rid of me that easily." As I drove home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The stars looked brighter, the road smoother. I thought about Pauline, about the burden she had carried until the end, about the courage it must have taken to tell me the truth. She had been my unlikely guardian, the quiet hand that nudged me toward this moment. When I reached home, I placed the tin box on the kitchen table one last time. The lilies embossed on it caught the moonlight. Slowly, I opened it just to touch the cardigan, the hospital bracelet, the letter that had changed everything. Then, carefully, I added something new, a recent photograph of me, Claire, and Anna from that evening. I folded it gently and placed it on top. The box wasn't just a vessel of secrets anymore. It had become something else entirely, a record of forgiveness. I locked it again, slipped the key onto a string, and hung it inside the sewing machine drawer, the same drawer where I'd found the bracelet that started it all. It felt right, like closing a circle. Then I sat by the window with my tea, watching the first pale light of dawn spread across the horizon. I thought about the life I'd lived, messy, fractured, but full of meaning. I had been a mother twice over, once by deception, once by grace, and though both journeys had been filled with pain, they had both led me here to truth, to peace. I smiled, feeling tears well up again. "It's over, Lucy," I whispered. "All of it. Rest now." Outside, the world was waking up. Somewhere, a bird began to sing, a fragile sound that grew stronger with each note. I closed my eyes and listened, letting the melody carry me. For the first time in 50 years, my heart didn't ache for what was lost. It beat quietly for what was found. The sewing machine sat by the window, silent and still, holding within it the stories of 3 women, one who gave life, one who loved beyond truth, and one who found her way back to both. And as morning filled the room with golden light, I realized that sometimes the things we lose don't vanish. They simply wait, patient and silent,